Okay. Hey, welcome to Eoc Logic for the month of May. We're doing the second program. Festival is Gardien interrupted our April event, so here we are again. We're fortunate to have with us Charlie Richard. Thank you for being here, Charles, and we're going to talk about your book,
Oh, thank you.
Coastal
Coastal Sketches.
Sketches, yes, and I've read most of it, and still saw that you covered, I think, Highway 1 first.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Then you covered the Cajun prairies,
Mhm.
and kind of interesting part of the history of that area.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad somebody is still talking about this book. This is a book that came out in 2015, so it's been out for a long time, but it's been a real limited kind of release, and so it's not a really well-known book. Back, I guess, a couple of years before 2015, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation they were heavily invested in trying to bolster coastal protection. The Baton Rouge Area Foundation is, of course, a foundation of philanthropy, and a lot of their giving was directed at trying to preserve coastal Louisiana. And they wanted to have a book come out for the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, as a way of having something to give to the many donors and philanthropists who had given money after Hurricane Katrina and after the BP oil spill to the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. So they wanted something as a gift to be able to give to those donors, and I was lucky enough to be asked to write this book for that purpose. And they allowed me a lot of freedom to sort of tell personal stories. And so basically, the book is the story of my partner on the project. His name was Frank McMains. He was a fantastic photographer. And Frank and I, we spent, probably about a year and a half, just visiting all along coastal Louisiana and stopping in different places and interviewing ordinary people. That was what we wanted to do. We felt like there's been enough out there from the scientists and economic leaders and political leaders and all of the back and forth about what can be done about our coastal crisis. And but Frank and I were interested in talking to ordinary folks to see how it was making a difference in their lives of ordinary people. And so each of the chapters in the book kind of brings us to different places along the coast to talk to different folks who live there. And you're right, the first chapter was sort of about the LA1, right?
Yeah.
Following Bayou Lafourche all the way down to Grand Isle.
Yeah. I read through it, and I think your second chapter was about Cajun prairie. There,
Yeah, I got to check because I'm not even sure. But yes, I did indeed write one chapter. Let's see, that one is, looks like that's the fourth. Yeah, the
Yeah.
coastal prairie, yeah.
yeah. And that's from Lafayette to the Texas border.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, if I recall the research right, it's been a while. Louisiana and Texas are one of the few places you can find in the world where you'll find prairie along a seacoast.
Yeah,
Kind of rare.
yeah, right.
Of course, now our prairies have all been plowed up and all of
Yeah.
that, and they need their own kind of protection. But if you kind of follow the curve of the Gulf Coast down along the Texas coast, you can still find authentic coastal prairie that's, in the hands of ranchers and others who kind of let it continue to grow naturally. But it's a rare kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think we have almost 3 million acres in Louisiana, but Texas got about 8 or 9 million acres.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and one of the things that I learned that made it different from the prairies of the Midwest, for example,
Yeah,
is that those prairies are very dry.
yeah,
And that's partly why the ground stays so hard and compacted. But here in Louisiana, of course, we get, tremendous amounts of rain by comparison.
yeah, 5 feet of rain.
5 feet of rain. And one of the things that made ours different is not only is it wetter, but it relies on those tremendous thunderstorms that we get for lightning strikes. And it would cause the prairie burns that
Yeah.
happen naturally in the Midwest because it's dry and all that. But here, the prairies relied on the many thunderstorms we had to start those fires.
And, you know, the thing, we lost the Civil War, and the boys that took over during Reconstruction set up the state land office in 1880, and it sold all the state lands, including the prairies. And the prairies were like 25 cents an acre, the prairie and the woodlands,
Yeah,
25 cents an acre. And the marshes and swamps were like 12.5 cents an acre.
that's right.
So you could get a square mile for $80.
Yeah,
And you know, that paragraph 11 probably was the most expensive paragraph that Louisiana ever put together.
it's the truth, and people sold that land so cheaply because they didn't think that it was really worth anything.
That's right. That's
For the longest time, well, the word wetland, as you well know, that really only dates back to about the 1950s.
Yeah.
Prior to that, in the minds of most Americans, wetlands were wastelands.
Yeah.
Swamps were just
Yeah.
something to be drained so you could turn it into good land.
Yeah, yeah,
But we know better now.
right, yeah. I think your book deals with that very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you had people come down and they invested $10,000 or $20,000, and they bought whole parishes.
It's the truth, yeah. Yeah. A lot of the Atchafalaya Basin is still owned by some very big land companies that go way back.
Yeah, yeah,
And of course, that's why we don't have any of the old growth cypress that we used to
Well,
have.
yeah. The Section 16 kind of protected that,
Yeah.
but they set up the Atchafalaya Levy Board in 1890, and in that legislation, they were given all the state lands from Concordia Parish to the Gulf, from the Mississippi to the Church.
Mhm.
And in 1900, they sold it all for $120,000.
My
About
goodness,
1.5 million acres for $120,000.
unbelievable.
And the only challenge to that was the Captiville case, where in 1917, the governor leased for oil exploration, I think Lake Dauterive, Lake Fosse Point, parts of Grand Lake, Lake Ron.
Mhm.
And the Louisiana Supreme Court in 1919, it was where the levy board had sold the lands, and 800,000 acres in Terrebonne Parish alone,
Wow.
and about 300,000 in LaFourche Parish.
Well, that's not something I was ever aware of. I have to admit, I didn't know
Yeah.
that about the court cases and that history, boy, that you're explaining. I need to look into that some more.
Yeah. I have a copy of the actual case, where the document that they were granted, where they sold it,
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they sold all the lands that they, and it's on the line all.
Mm.
And the levy board was given the state land so that they had the power to sell it and to buy it. And but the sale of the property meant they could finance the levee building that they thought was necessary.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, you mentioned the end of the Civil War. Well, for decades and decades after that, Louisiana was so poor that we were very, very vulnerable as a state to people taking advantage of the natural resources and the land that was here.
Yeah.
And I know that another great, great writer, whom I miss very much, Greg Girard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Greg wrote some very, very eloquent memories of the trees that we lost during that time. And I think it's hard for us today to conceive of just how enormous those cypress were. It was really like the redwood forests of
Yeah.
Louisiana, of California, but cypress for Louisiana.
Yeah.
And he wrote some beautiful sort of elegies for those lost forests.
It was kind of amazing to see, you know, they thought they couldn't replant cypress because it took too long to grow, you know. But that's not true. Had they really replanted it, they'd still be in the cypress business.
When my son Simon, he was a Boy Scout, and one of the memories that'll always stick out in my mind was he was part of the Boy Scouts effort for, I don't remember if it was 1 million cypress trees that they had set out to plant, or 250,000 or whatever it
Yeah.
was, but it was quite a memorable experience. All of those boys in uniform getting together on weekends, and I'd be out there with them and planting cypress sapling after cypress sapling and trying to reclaim some of what was lost. And
Yeah.
that was, for me, seeing those young boys do that was very inspiring for me. And I know that you were always a big, big part of the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, 42 years as a scoutmaster,
wow,
but 125 boys to the rank of E.
fantastic.
I had spent 5 years in my troop. As a boy, I was a counselor at camp and everything.
Yeah, I'm
We
very,
had one Eagle Scout in 5 years.
wow. It's not easy. People overlook how hard it is to become an Eagle Scout.
Yeah,
And I'm very proud to say that that same son, Simon, he's going to be doing something he's dreamed of since he was a Cub Scout, and that is this summer. He's a school teacher, so he has summers off. This summer, he's going to be working as a camp counselor out in the Atchafalaya Basin for Swamp Base. And when he was 15, he was on one of the early treks, yes, down the Atchafalaya,
yeah.
down the Atchafalaya.
Yeah.
Was it
Well,
62
they never-
miles or?
They never get on the river.
Yeah, not right, but they paddled through Henderson Swamp in July. I remember that
Yeah.
for sure. He came home sunburned but happy.
Yeah. I noticed you covered the Chiramachi Indians real well,
Thank you.
and you know, some of the impressive things that you wrote about was they made to deal with one of the floods, they made this giant, I guess, a pot, huh?
Oh, one of
Yeah.
the myths. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
And they got in the pot, and of course, the floods came, the pot floated. But then the rattlesnake came up and wanted to get in, you know, and they thought, well, you're gonna bite us, you know. And the rattlesnake did bite them, and I don't know how you get, you know, a snake to talk to people, but
Well, that's a very old Chitimacha story, and I first heard it from another writer who's Roger Stoof, and Roger is one of the great storytellers from among the Chitimacha. His father was the last traditional chief of the Chitimacha tribe. And when the tribe got federal recognition, his father, Emil, became the first elected tribal chairman. But what's, I think, also really important is that Emil Stoof was, to the best of my knowledge, the first one to ever write down any of those old Chitimacha stories. And it was collected by a folklorist named Marcia Godet, who did us a tremendous, all of us as Louisianians, a tremendous service by preserving some of those old stories. And the way that story goes is the way Roger tells it. The same great flood that you read about in the book of Genesis came, of course, to what became Louisiana. And like you said, the Great Spirit warned them ahead of time. They built this big clay pot, and the Chitimacha family was saved from the flood by floating along in this pot. Now, the Chitimacha were famous for their pottery and baskets. And as they're floating along, Rattlesnake swims up and begs them to let him come on board so he doesn't drown. And the Chitimacha were pretty skeptical of this, but in the end, they let the rattlesnake come on board to their pot, and he was saved. And as a promise, the rattlesnake was so grateful, he promised that no rattlesnake henceforth would ever bite a Chitimacha Indian. That, you know, the sound of his rattle, it would always warn them when they were nearby, and afterwards, no Chitimacha was ever bitten by a rattlesnake. But the cottonmouth, as Roger writes in his story, the cottonmouth made no such promise because he could swim.
Rattlesnake can too.
Well, I guess that's true, yeah.
But the eastern diamondback is certainly in the area, you know,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful snake, but it gets very large, you know.
One of the reasons I have such a great love for the Chitimacha Indian tribe, I've been fortunate to work with a number of Louisiana's Indian tribes through my work as a documentary filmmaker. But I have a particular love for the Chitimacha because not only are they the only native peoples in Louisiana who still reside on their ancestral lands, they have always been a wetland people. And all of their mythology, the stories they tell, the folklore and so forth, it centers around that balance between water and land that really was their home. Their home was essentially the Atchafalaya Basin and the Bayou Teche region, and it extended over to include Bayou Lafourche, which if you look at some really old maps from the 1700s, Bayou Lafourche was called the River of the Chitimachas, or the Chitimacha River in English.
Yeah.
And the Chitimacha counted all the way up to the west bank of the Mississippi as part of their ancestral home. And all of their stories from their creation myths and on are all about that delicate balance between water and land that we have here in Louisiana. And so, to me, those folks, they're the original wetland Louisianans. We have a lot to learn from them.
Have you ever dealt with the Takapaw?
Only a little. You know, when I was coming up, you know, I was always told that the Attakapaw were an extinct people, you know, that tribe was no longer, you know, in Louisiana, and that's what all the textbooks said. But only in later years did I come to learn that that's not true. There are still people who are descended from these Attakapaw Indians that, you know, that the Attakapaw Post was really the first European settlement, one of the first European settlements out here in Acadiana, and it was named for these indigenous Attakapaw. And there are thankfully still people today coming forward and trying to rekindle that identity that they have.
I had Mike Amos, who was their chief,
Really?
and he was an E9, he was a Vietnam veteran,
Ah, be darned.
and he lived in Beaumont. And, but he was on my program.
I'll be darned. No,
And
that's,
some nut called in and said, well, Chief, is your God the same as our God? And do you recognize Jesus as your Savior? And I was about to hang up on him, you know. But the chief filled in, and he chimed in, he said, well, are you a Cajun? Do you come from Cajun? He says, well, 200 years before your people got here, the Jesuits got here.
that's
And
true.
they converted it
Yeah.
all to Christianity.
August 2009, he was sitting right here.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's right.
Oh, man.
So,
Boy. Yeah, that's,
so anyway, somebody called in and asked about the dog houses that the Micmac Indians used. He said, well, about 300 years ago, about 200 Micmac Indians came down from Canada, and they brought that custom with of building a doghouse over the graves.
that's where that came
That's
from.
because Connie did a program on it,
Yes,
and she didn't know what the story was behind it, but they had them at Grand Isle. They have them in somewhere around Ville Plain.
yes, that's right. They're very rare, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find any today. But you know, you mentioned
At the
Connie
East Cemetery on the
Okay.
near Mermentau.
near Mermentau.
Yeah.
Well, you
And
know, there
they
was
have about, I guess, about 30 or 40.
still standing.
Yeah, still standing.
So you mentioned Connie Castile. Connie Castile and I have been making documentary films together for about 20 years. And we had a student named Jeremy Broussard, if I remember correctly, and he wanted to do a little documentary about this. And he and some of the other folks at UL, I'm not even going to try and remember all of them because there were a lot of great people who worked on that project. They made a documentary called Little Houses. And it was all about the little grave houses that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it was a real peculiar custom, but I don't think I was aware that it was connected to the Mi'kmaq Indians of
Who joined, yeah,
Acadie, Nova Scotia today.
well, they came from the West Coast. The
Oh.
Russians were shooting them and killing them and
Oh,
feeding them a lot of whiskey and stealing their furs.
yeah.
And so they came down here,
Oh, I'll be
about
darned.
300 of them, and they brought with them. The custom is, I think it was like about, he said about 1630 was when they came.
No,
So we got a call.
we got a
from
call.
them. You on the air?
Hello?
Hello?
Let's see. Hello? No?
You call back.
Yeah, well, yes, please call back. There we go.
You on the air?
Hello? Let's see, maybe it's this. Hello?
Turned it on.
Oh.
You on the air?
Anybody there want to talk to us?
May not be doing this right. So. Anyway,
Do you want to try lifting the receiver and see if you hear any? No?
you on the air?
Hello, it's good to hear y'all talking about the Chittamauga and the Eoc and the Chittamauga. I know Charles Wright did a film about some of the shelters along the coast, and I know Harold talked about climbing some of these shelters. Did you think about those a bit, their
Yeah.
locations and what happened to them?
Got it. Yeah, that'd be great. It's my daughter Catherine.
Oh, well, please, relay the question that
She,
you.
she asked about the middens, you know.
Oh, yes. If that was Catherine, then we were just talking about that the other day. The
Well, when
range.
we were kids, we, we were often around Intercoastal City, and we'd paddle down to Vermilion, to where it met the bay, which was only a couple of miles from where the Mosses had their place. And they had three, what they call pyramid mounds at the mouth of the bay. And I know about it because LSU did a study of the Vermilions being one of the Mississippi's westernmost tracts. And they dedicated 2 pages of that report to blasting the state for tearing down those mounds.
Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned in the book that they had a mound south of Morgan City that was about 100 feet high.
That's what I was told. Again, Roger Emile Stoof, the writer, Chitimacha writer I was mentioning, he shared with me a story that had been passed to him from among some of the older folks. And the story was that there was a tall, stepped pyramid made out of those white Rangia clamshells.
Yeah.
Which, as you know, once you kind of pack them down, they become almost like concrete. They're
Yeah.
so hard. And the story that he told me was that there was the biggest of these Rangia clamshell pyramids. You call them pyramids rather than mounds because that's, according to the way he described it, he compared them to the way that you might see stepped pyramids in, say, Mexico or Central America left by the natives there. But this big one, south of Morgan City, is no longer there because, according to the story, around the time of World War I, the U.S. Navy, rolling out its new battleships, decided that that would make a perfect target for naval artillery practice. And so that pyramid, that Chitimacha stepped pyramid made out of clamshells is no longer there. It was blown to smithereens by U.S. Navy. But whether or not that story can be verified, we do know that plenty of Chitimacha mounds made from these Rangia clamshells were destroyed by industries looking for fill to make road beds and driveways and so on. And if you lived in Louisiana anytime really in the 20th century, you probably remember South Louisiana anyway, those white clamshell roads or driveways kicked up big white dust and all. Well, chances are those were dug up by drag lines and other things. And Roger tells stories about how when some of these drag lines would come into the Atchafalaya Basin and dredge up all of these Rangia clamshells, these old mounds, the old Indians would be on the opposite bank, just wailing and weeping, seeing the bones of their ancestors tumbling down out of these scoops that were used for digging up this stuff and turning it into roadways. And the comparison would be like somebody coming along and tearing down St. John Cathedral just to use the bricks for something.
Yeah, yeah.
It was just a truly, truly sad and ignorant episode in our history.
Yeah. The square mound on the northeast corner of White Lake in Vermilion Parish, and they had the round mound, the Abbeville Meridian did a story on them,
Oh,
and still somebody walked into the Meridian with this human skull, and all the teeth was in place and everything. And so they asked him, where did he get it, you know? He said, well, they're digging up the shells on White Lake, and that's where it came from.
Oh,
So
my.
it took him 3 months before he could get Shell Morgan to take him out to, Shell Morgan ran the the fuel dock in Morgan in at Intracoastal City. So he had access to boats, and so he went out there and took the editor of the Abbeville Meridian, and I have that article. And he came back and said he was there to see, witness about 1,000 skeletons on the barges.
Ah,
And he said the bones of the savages will work as well as the shells to smooth the road of our modern automobiles, you know.
that just sickens, that just sickens my spirit hearing that. You know, and these are such common stories.
Yeah, an old man Gooch who ran the Get Abbeville, it was kind of a little, right on the main, right by, I think Magdalen Square. And it was, but he would pay the kids that lived along the road 25 cents a bucket for the artifacts that they got from that mound, you know.
Let me say a word or two about that, if you don't mind. You know, a lot of us grew up finding arrowheads in the dirt and so forth, and you know, that's a good way of kids thinking about the ancient past and connecting them to it. And I'm not going to say that finding arrowheads in a plowed field is something wrong with that, but I will say that there are right ways and there are wrong ways to go about these kinds of things. There is a organization called the Louisiana Archaeological Society. It's made up of both professional and amateur or avocational archaeologists, and they are more than happy to provide folks with the kind of ethical guidelines that you should follow when it comes to looking for or finding prehistoric artifacts from the native inhabitants, the original inhabitants of Louisiana. And there is, I know this because I'm a kind of an avocational archaeologist myself, and there's a tremendous excitement that happens to make a find. But making a find is, as I said, there's a right way and a wrong way. And I'll give you one little example. There's a place down not far from Sharonton, and I want to say, is it Grand Lake that it's on? I'm not entirely sure. A place called Shell Beach. And it's one of these stretches of clamshell that we're talking about, these white clamshells. When I was the writer and producer for an LPB film called Native Waters, this gentleman I keep mentioning, Roger Stoof, he and I worked together on that project, taking things that he had written, stories that he had recorded, and working with director Tickalodin to make this film. On one occasion, he took us out to Shell Beach, and this was a boat launch today.
Yeah, at
but-
Sheraton.
That's right, at Sharonton. And as we're walking along, he was telling the story of how when he was a kid, his father or somebody would take him out there, and they'd wander along there and find pieces of pottery. And lo and behold, just as he's telling this story, he spots one down there on the ground, bends over and picks it up. And sure enough, it's a piece of ancient clay pottery. You could see the decorations that were incised in it. And he told the story of how when he was a young man, he found one that still had the thumbprint of the maker of that piece of pottery.
Wow.
And he treasured that because here it was in his hands, the thumbprint, and no two thumbprints are ever the same, of one of his ancestors from who knows how many centuries ago that had literally left their mark on this piece of pottery. And here he was all these centuries later able to hold that in his hands and it gave them a sense of connection to that past.
Yeah.
And, but as I said, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it, and if you're not sure, don't do it until you've checked with the Louisiana Archaeological Society to see about what's the right way to go about looking for and finding these Indian artifacts.
I've worked a lot with those guys, and I took them to Intracoastal City. And there's two spots that we got involved with. One was right at the intersection of the Vermilion and the Intracoastal, right at Intracoastal City. And on that, I guess it'd be on the northwest corner, we found two obsidian,
Oh, wow.
which means it's a black rock,
Volcanic rock.
Volcanic rock, yes.
Yeah.
And we found a fishing string. It looked like, it's like 7, 8 strands, and there's about 20 feet of it.
My
And
goodness.
it was not, it was well in the shells. And they sent it to LSU to evaluate and see what it was made of. It was very, very strong, and you could not even break it. And we had 20 feet of it, so,
Well, one of the things that I learned about those regions, and you mentioned the fishing and these obsidian projectile points.
well, you see, they had a manual that they could look at the back of the clay and see where it came from.
That's right.
And our pottery is great, but if it comes from way up the Mississippi, it might be red, it might be orange.
Interesting.
And there was a manual they had with them. They had a hole in the manual, and then they had the color of the soil where it came from, so they could identify where it came from. And you had to be convinced that, that these people really traveled.
They really did. And it's so easy for people to overlook the sophistication of these ancient cultures that were here in the wetlands of Louisiana. One of the points that was made to me is that when you live in a place, as the Chitimacha did, there in the Atchafalaya Basin and along the Teche, that's so rich in resources. The
Yeah,
struggle
yeah.
for food was
Not there
was,
yet.
was it wasn't much of a struggle at all.
Yeah.
And as Roger and others from the tribe have told me, it was nothing to get up in the morning, go throw your net out into the water or set your traps, and then you have the food you need for the day, and then you do it once again before evening. And of course, there were gardens that the Chitimacha made in their villages to supply some of their vegetable needs and so forth. But when you have that much time and you're not spending all your time and all your calories chasing down protein sources like bison or something, as the Plains Indians were,
Yeah.
that gives you leisure. That gives you time to do other things. And that time that they had was spent building up a culture, building these mounds, building up sophisticated beliefs and spiritual practices and storytelling and a very rich culture that is only possible when the resources are right there in front of you. And the one thing about Louisiana's wetlands is that it's probably some of the most protein-dense places that you can find in America, North America, for living off the land. And that's why so many people, starting with the indigenous folks, but all the way through with Cajuns and all the other folks who've lived in South Louisiana, it's what drew them here. There was a certain easiness of living when it came to finding food or growing food or hunting and fishing.
there was a segment of the Takapo that went back, they came down with the geese and they left with the geese.
Huh.
And they would go up the Red River all the way up to where they couldn't go by boat anymore, and then they went by horseback. And every year they made that trek. The interviewed Ivy Richard, who ran the mail boat to Pecan Island
Really?
before the war.
Wow.
And Ivy said that there was a lady there at Pecan Island that lived near the canal, that's what they call the school canal, that she learned their language. And she would be the go-between. They trade furs for their 22 rifles, their shotgun shells, their traps, and they came with the geese and they left with them. And amazingly, when Mike Amos was here, he talked about the Micmac Indians joining them, but he also talked about the custom of, there were people that lived here, and there were people that had villages all the way up, where they had all the way back to New Mexico, northern New Mexico, best I could tell.
Yeah, it's amazing how sophisticated the trade and travel relations for indigenous people really were. And it was that way for a long time. You can pay a visit up to Poverty Point up in North Louisiana, which is not far from the Mississippi River, and realize that, 2,000 years before Christ, that place, which, by the way, agriculture hadn't really been developed at that point. These were still hunter-gatherer cultures that had a level of sophistication that allowed them to trade for copper from the areas around Lake Michigan, or for certain types of stone that you really only find in North Georgia, and so on. And so these were hardly the kind of primitives that for so many years we were told by school books. These were a very sophisticated people, and they knew that in the wetlands this was a place that you could live and stay and build stability. Whereas in other parts of North America, you had to stay on the move all the time to follow wild game, like I said, like bison and other herd animals out in the plains.
He talked about the contacts they had with the Jesuits, He said the chief of the Takapo village at Lake Charles, when the group of French and Spanish historians came spent a year with him in 1801, 1802, that the priests could handle the translations, and then they recorded the way they caught fish, the way they lived, how they hunted, and the point that he makes, that they had a written language because of that visit, from the historians that were here during 1801, 1802, about a year before the Louisiana Purchase. But he also talked about a team of map makers that came down from, I guess they knew a lot about, in the 1600s, they knew a lot about the river, what was in the Gulf east of the Mississippi, but they didn't know anything about west. So a team of map makers came down, and it was in November of 1698 that they came, and they found out that the trek north was the Vermilion, the Teche, and they found out that they had water at Cheniere Teague. You know, and I said, you know, they gave them all this valuable information.
Yeah,
How could they deal with the language barrier? He said, well, two cabin boys
that's right.
had come ashore and had learned their language, and they were about in their 20s then, and so, and one of those boys wrote a book about that, and so I need to get a hold of Mike Amos, see if he's still around, and see if I could get a copy of that book.
Oh, I'd love it if you shared it with me too. I'd like to see that. Yeah, that was one thing that the early explorers were pretty smart about, especially Iberville and Bienville, right? Iberville and Bienville were, Iberville was considered the father of Louisiana and colonial times, and his younger brother, who was only about 18 years old when he came, was the man Bienville. And Bienville, of course, became the father of New Orleans. Well, they understood very, very well that rather than make the mistakes that the Spanish conquistadors had made, you know, centuries earlier of trying to make war on the native peoples, it's a lot better to do business with them. And in order to do business, they had to be able to communicate. And so you're right, they would, these ships would always come with a number of cabin boys, kind of serving an apprenticeship to the sailors and so forth. And Bienville, who was already very good with languages, he spoke a number of the native tongues here, but they would also, as you say, leave a cabin boy behind in the village for a year, 2 years, who knows how long. And oftentimes the tribes would give in exchange a young person. And the reason it was these cabin boys and youths who were responsible for this is that as we know today, young people pick up languages much quicker, much more easily than older folks do. And so, yeah, these cabin boys became kind of a key personnel for facilitating these trade relations between Indian tribes and the Europeans who came after them. Now, you mentioned Teague Island, Cheniere Teague. Tell me a little bit about that, because that's a place that I'd like to know more about, and I know you've spent a lot of time there yourself.
Yeah. Well, we take a trip there every year with Catherine. So,
It's got an interesting history. Tell me about that.
well, I think Wade Vincent was the last school teacher. And they had a school there, they had a church there. In fact, when they left Cheniere Teague, they all came to a spot at Esther. And the church there, the original church at Esther, was torn down from Cheniere Teague.
Wow.
But Paul Kemp is doing a book on the 16th century Gulf of Mexico, and Cheniere Teague is listed as a source of fresh water.
Wow.
They had spring water there, and so if it was listed as, of course, Cheniere Teague means Tiger Oaks, and so, but that name's been around for at least 4 centuries.
Yeah, yeah. I know that the native panthers that we have here in Louisiana, I guess they resemble cougars elsewhere.
Yeah.
When the French settlers came, they didn't have names for a lot of the animals, the new animals that they were encountering here, and so they'd give them names that for animals that they were familiar with, that resembled them. So for alligators, they were cocodries, which is crocodile, or for these cougars and wildcats, they used the name Teague, which is tiger.
Tiger, yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, you know what? It occurs to me, I never did really show the book that you were talking about. This is the cover of Coastal Sketches, And as I said, it's a book of stories and photographs that my partner Frank McMains and I collected. It was commissioned by the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, and it's kind of hard to find. So I was delighted when you called and that you had been able to read it, and I'm happy to talk about it. It's been a long time since I've had occasion to talk about the stories in this book.
You mentioned that the Bayou Teche was, had a big snake
That's another great
miles long.
Chitimacha myth, yes.
Yeah.
But you know, and certainly this point of view is one that really was brought home to me by Roger Stoof. That story, which is familiar to a lot of people in Acadiana, the story was that in very, very ancient times, once upon a time, there was a tremendous serpent, and this big snake threatened the Chitimacha villages, and it was so great that it stretched from, you know, what we would think of today as Bayou Catawba area, Port Barry or something like that, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, Morgan City area. And for ages, this serpent just threatened the people of the Chitimacha, and so their warriors fought against it with spears and arrows and everything they could. And after a long, long time, they finally managed to kill this great snake. And if you've ever killed a snake, you know, to cut the head off of it with a shovel or something, you know that the body of that snake still keeps wiggling around for a long, long time after it's dead. And the story goes, according to the Chitimacha, that the sort of pathway that it dug, that wriggling snake dug in the dirt, became a pretty deep depression. And when the water flowed into it, it became Bayou Teche. Now, the name Teche is kind of disputed. I kind of grew up hearing that was the Chitimacha word for snake, but that's not exactly right. There's a wonderful historian named Shane Bernard. Shane Bernard works for the Tabasco Company, and he wrote a wonderful book simply called, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was simply called Teche. And he quite literally wrote the book on the history of Bayou Teche. And the truth of the matter is that the name Teche, nobody's quite sure where it came from. It is true that the Chitimacha did call that waterway by the Chitimacha word that meant snake, but it's not the same word as Teche. And so it's kind of become a little bit confusing as to where that name actually comes from. But the fact is that yes, that bayou was indeed named after the story of that great serpent from Chitimacha mythology and oral history. And as Roger has written about in his own work, a book called Losing Home, A Native Waters Compendium. You can find that on Amazon. He writes about the fact that the Bayou Teche was once a channel of the the course of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
The Mississippi changes its course every 1,000, 1,200 years or so, and you
It's
can.
called, it was the main path of the Mississippi from the last ice age, and it went in that path for 5,000 years.
That's right. Very long history there. That is the old Mississippi, and
And it's called the Sycamore Sally
really.
Teche River. Yeah.
Ah, well,
It had two main branches, by Sycamore
And
and
Bayou
by
Sally.
Sally.
interesting.
And Salé is French word for salt, so.
Yes, that's right. That makes sense. Well, all of these stories that come to us from the Chitimacha, they all contain important truths in their own ways that we can learn from as modern people, that tell us about the relationship between the water, the land, and the people who inhabit it here. And they've lived here longer than any of us.
Yeah,
1 minute.
so, thank you
Oh, this was
Charles,
my pleasure. I'm
being here.
so happy that you had me on as a guest, and I'm very happy that you gave me a chance to talk about this book. And if any of your viewers have questions, my email address is up there. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who has questions about coastal sketches.
So, 25 seconds.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure and
Yeah.
an honor.
And honor, yes,
Thank you.
20 seconds.
You and your family have done so much for
yeah,
the land here in Louisiana.
yeah.
10 seconds.
Thank you.
All right. 5.
Brilliant pen.
But these are great photos in here.
Yeah,
Look at
Frank
it.
is a very gifted photographer. I'm looking for the next chance I can get to work with him.